For those who don't know, Verna, where do you teach? And is teaching
So,
your full-time gig?
so teaching is now my full-time gig. As you can see on this slide, I'm executive director of the MTM, which is the Master in Translational Medicine program. Let me just switch so that I have my slide presenter view. Okay, so I teach at UC Berkeley and UCSF. I teach one class, so the rest of my role is basically running this program, which is translational medicine for masters. So quickly before I move on, probably the first thing that most people say is, what the hell is translational medicine? So if you wiki translational medicine, it gives a really good definition, which is basically translating science, benchtop research from that benchtop all the way to bedside or clinical use. So you can think of it as benchtop to bedside, or you can think of it as concept to clinical use and commercialization. So that's translational medicine. It's broad. It's not just medical devices, but it also, hence the word translational medicine is broad to mean both drugs, therapeutics, as well as devices and diagnostics.
You know, I looked it up as you spoke, and there's a graph here and everything, and I still don't completely get it, other than thinking that translation is another way of saying taking raw data and making it understandable by your different audiences. Is that the essence of it?
Yeah, or basically translating something that is, in basically the research mode, or an idea, needs finding, and basically saying, all right, how do I get that into commercialization? Because it's not just science. And that kind of leads me to my next slide. So why engage with academia? So first of all, a good idea is not enough, which is why this program is called translational medicine. Other people might know Stanford Biodesign or other programs that are called biodesign. Because Berkeley has a whole separate biodesign program that is really more focused on biomimicry, translational medicine is more specific, and hence the name for our program. But it basically is taking these things from an idea and then teaching all the regulatory aspects, reimbursement strategy, business strategy in terms of business models, clinical trial strategy, intellectual property. So taking all of those things and teaching them in a one-year program. I'm not going to do a whole pitch on the MTM program, but just to let you know there's other programs that are out there. And what I wanted to do was really tell you about a little bit about how I kind of fell into this program and what I found are the benefits of partnering with academia. And some of you mentioned it when we were just hopping onto this call. So the first one is you get to help train the next generation of innovative engineers. Our program specifically is not even just for engineers, but because we teach those other things other than the science and engineering, we also recruit life science background students, as well as MDs and nurses that are interested in learning how to get a device to the market. You get to engage with high quality students as prospective employees, complete projects under budget, especially if you're helping to sponsor students that might be working on a capstone project. You can network and initiate consulting relationships with faculty. You'll get brand awareness of your own company, whether it's a startup or a larger company with students and faculty. Learn about current research that's going on at the university or college near you. Also, if you get into teaching or lecturing at all, you can gain skills of teaching and human learning, as well as presenting, which is actually really helpful for just learning how to market yourself and your own business, because you have to learn how to keep students awake in the classroom, especially if you have early morning classes. And then there's also technology licensing opportunities with a lot of the universities that are probably near you. So, oops, let me go back. So, but here's all the what ifs. So what if you don't even have a master's degree or much less a PhD? That was my first question, because the way I fell into this was that I went to go do a guest lecture That went over really well. This was at Santa Clara University 4 years ago. And then the department chair said, oh, we would love for you to teach a class. Would you be open to teaching a class? And I said, well, I don't even have a master's, much less a PhD. They said, we don't care. We have plenty of those. We want people with long, deep industry knowledge to teach. And so I said, oh, well, okay. And then I said, what do you want me to teach? And they said, you tell us. So that was another surprise. And for me, I just thought about it for like 2 or 3 minutes. And I thought, okay, what is the reason why I don't typically want to hire engineers right out of school? Especially when if I've been in a small department or when I've been in a startup. Well, the number one reason was it takes several months, maybe even 6 months or a year to train students on design control. So that was the first class I taught, was design control. And from there, I added 2 other courses. One was on root cause analysis. One was on kind of an overview of the medical device development process in the industry based on the biodesign book by Paul Yock. So you might say, well, I don't have connections. If you go and do a guest lecture, those connections start to be made. You can reach out also to someone like me. I've started to have connections now with a lot of these universities. And also you can just start with the college, the university, or even the community college in your area. They are hungry and typically quite happy to have people come and just do a guest lecture or some of the other activities that I'll show you. So if you're saying, I don't even have the time, some of the simple ways to start, like I said, it would do a guest lecture or even just go do a job fair, a recruitment, things like that, that could take you, just a couple of hours a year if you only do that a couple times a year. Doesn't matter if you're not an engineer, if you're from industry, if you've got regulatory background or any of these things that I mentioned that are important for translational medicine or biodesign, then they are happy to have you come and talk about quality systems or wherever they might feel like they have a gap. And if you're not sure you can lecture or teach effectively, a great place to practice and start, again, is with a guest lecture. I think the folks that I've had to come to my campus and guest lecture, whether I was at Santa Clara or now at Berkeley, that's a best way to start and then get feedback in terms of improvement. There's also online courses for effective teaching. And I found one of the fantastic ones was ACUE. I think it's like American or Associated College of University Educators. And they have wonderful courses on student-focused teaching and also even online teaching. So, and other things. So diversity, inclusiveness, basically making the environment for students a lot more stress-free because, oh, well, guess what? When you have a much lower stress environment, then humans learn much better. So ways that you can engage.
Anyone on the call taught class before? And
as a
as a guest lecturer?
As a matter of fact, I do. And by the way, hi, Verna, Ross with
Hi.
Business Systems. How are you?
Yes, hi, Ross.
Good
Good
to
to
see
see you.
I lecture every semester at the University of Minnesota Business School on marketing analytics for the medical device industry.
Oh,
And I love it. It's so fun.
you
It's so
know a
fun.
guy.
Yeah. And I'm a real curmudgeon in the class, and they just hate it in the best possible.
Oh, charming. Sign me up. Mark, you teach as well?
Yeah, I've been online with several different companies themselves that do online training. So they've had me do things like new product introduction, which I believe is what Verna's talking about. It's all new product introduction. It's regulatory. It's CAPA, it's complaints. It's basically every step of the way, all the different disparate parts of the entire package of getting that product from idea all the way out the door. So, and technical writing. So I'm a writer. So they've also had me do technical writing because there's a lot of people just do not know how to write properly to get the, you don't bury the lead, you put it right up front, the who, what, when, where, why, hows, all that stuff. It's very, very common sense, but it's still one of those things that's got to be taught. So I've been online doing these things for a number of years now.
Jan, I think I saw you raise your hand. Do you
Yeah,
guest lecture or teach a class?
I've done guest lectures. I helped a university put together a packaging program at one point in time, but recently I do a lot of stuff with packaging design and development and validation work, because people forget packaging is a little bit different than product, but it's a very important part of it, and we've got to make sure it's done properly with statistics and understanding your environment and going through all those different pieces and why you want to test the way you do and how to make sure you meet all the regulatory requirements.
Lauren, I see your hand is up, and thank you for sharing your actual environment with us today.
Oh, you are so welcome. So I am a guest lecturer at UW. I've also done some guest lectures at Seattle U, and I've also been a project advisor at Seattle U for several years. So I with the team in the fall and work with them all the way through the year in order to help them understand how to manage a project.
Goldie?
Similar story. So I think industry experience is really valued by universities. So I do guest lecture at Sunnybrook, and then UFT, also Sheridan, University of British Columbia. And mostly it's about this translational research for devices, like bringing devices for commercialization. So yeah, it's like, you know, when you go there, I also teach a biomedical engineering master's class on medical device regulations. So it's just, I totally agree. They are hungry to learn. I mean,
Almost everyone on this call is a teacher. I feel so lame, and I wish I didn't ask the question.
Well, you're our teacher, Joe. You're our
Go on.
Yeah.
teacher, Joe. I mean,
Yeah.
Mark?
Yeah, I've taught in programs. Well, I was 20 years, I worked as a training consultant and have worked for training organizations. But I also did some, you could say, training and teaching at University of Applied Science in Finland, and was helping them with the international marketing. That was the direction.
Okay. Dr. Packard?
I don't think I'm a doctor yet. I will never go get that master's or PhD. I don't have the patience. But back in high school, I was in the National Honor Society, and it was a requirement to teach other students.
Oh,
So I started
I didn't have
teaching
that
high school
requirement.
students all the way back in the 80s. And then in 94, I started teaching college students. My mentor was an ex-Eli Lilly person and was teaching at Tufts and also at UMass Lowell. And he asked me to teach some of his classes because I could give some of the practical experience, because he hadn't worked in industry in about a decade. So he asked me to teach some of the hands-on stuff. And that's what the students really want. They don't want to know how to fill out paperwork or read standards or read guidance. They're really good at that. What they have trouble with is understanding, you know, what kind of equipment do people use and what is it like to work in a company where you're actually doing things other than paperwork. And so I worked for a decade in pharma and biotech. So I was actually building facilities and running equipment and teaching operators on how to run the equipment and repair it and maintain it. So there was a lot of that, and we were scaling things up to thousands of liters. We got up to over 20,000 liters.
Wow.
So I worked at American Home Products, Pfizer, Abbott, all kinds of really big pharma and biotech companies, Amgen, Genentech, Genzyme. I had been to all the facilities throughout in Alston Landing in Boston. So to be able to tell them what the facilities were like, and then I got to travel internationally, so I'd explain what it was like in other countries, and that really blew people's minds. And now I'm getting to do it again in biotech, in medical devices. So it's a lot of fun when you have some hands-on experience and you've been to facilities. And auditors, they get into so many different facilities that people don't see. I get to see the CDC. I get to see the American Type Culture Collection. I got to see where anthrax specimens are stored. So all this stuff you see about only in the movies, I've actually gotten to see some of that stuff.
And I know you have so much spare time, so it all fits in nicely for you. Dr. Carr.
Morning, everybody. I'm a guest lecturer once a year twice a year at University of Maryland. I judge the pitch competitions. I did that just a few weeks ago, and also Salisbury University, which is in the shore of Maryland. I discuss or I lecture with and basically tell the story, and also judge pitch competitions for both the business school and the entrepreneur class that's there. And also I'm a panelist quite a lot. Yesterday I was a panelist at a Wharton Harvard Summit down in Arlington, Virginia, which is pretty cool. And it was pretty successful too. So
Nice.
yeah, a little bit, not a whole lot, but that's me.
Speaking of Wharton, there's my buddy Eddie, and I have to say that as soon as you got on, I reflected on my 1991 Ed Capabianca haircut before the Follies. And I don't know who cut your hair this time, but they went for it.
It just happened moments ago, and I made the mistake of telling the guy, this is my first haircut since the pandemic. Because when the
So he
pandemic
wanted
came,
to cover you for the next 3 years.
apparently he was like, maybe he thought it had not been, I was cutting it myself for like 2+ years, right? And so he must have thought, oh, he usually has it. So he took all of it off.
We'll take the
Well, it
money
looks
you'll
very
save on
handsome.
future haircuts you might have had to take.
So yeah, exactly. So I
But
think
you
I'm
were
going
going
to
to
go.
contribute something different to this call. I think.
Yes. So my teaching experience many years ago, I was everyone's worst nightmare. In London, I was a summer school math teacher to kids whose parents had transferred to London. So I was the worst. Then more recently, just a few years ago, I was a guest lecturer at the University of Essex for master's students in biotech on the idea of intellectual property and helping them understand and manage what discoveries they may have in labs and things like that, and how that might become something worthwhile in career-wise.
Okay.
Which was again to some of the things here, it's very helpful to have some practical experience of that, and then help people at a younger age understand how to position themselves.
I had no idea this would be a 10 to 15 minute sidebar. Next time, should I have a teacher, I'm going to say, has anyone here never taught a class? And just leave it at that. John Richard, you too are a teacher?
From time to time, it all started with a high school level chemistry class, and then I ended up working on some senior projects at University of Texas, San Antonio here. And we've got a small online group that, well, it's not that small, and they do high schools and things like that. And they just changed their name, so now I can't remember their old or new name. And I'll get an email every once in a while from them saying, can you appear on that? And then for 10 years, I was helping people find jobs in all kinds of ways of life. And so that's a whole little area of teaching. And now every once in a while, I'll have somebody just walk up to me and says, I've got a friend who's having trouble doing this. Could you help him? And so we meet at a coffee shop. And so you could say it's everything from organized and scheduled to, oh, hello, and just start doing something. So
Before I give the floor back to
diverse.
Verna, I have a question that is strictly raise your hand. Okay, I'm not going to call on you, just raise your hand. All of you teach. Do any of you get paid to do it, or is it all volunteer work, as I suspect?
I get paid, so I think.
Of course
I mean,
you do.
people
You're a
do.
full timer. Oh, I meant like physically take your hand and put it in the sky, not put your buttons. It's an old fashioned thing that we used to do.
Yeah.
So Joe, are you asking, put your hand up if we get paid, or?
If you don't get, basically, who's volunteering?
Oh, who's volunteering? Okay.
Everybody's volunteering pretty much.
Mm.
Scott Hensley's, this is his first call. What do you think of my impressive friends, huh?
I love it.
I love it too.
A lot of experience in the room.
Verna, there she is in the top right-hand corner for me.
Yeah.
Please continue, and I'll try to ask more succinct, narrower questions that only one or two people might know the answer to.
No, I think it's good because I mean, I didn't, because I know how these sessions are. There's a lot of back and forth. So I think it's helpful to kind of know what people's experience is teaching. And I found that not only is there a lot that you can give, but there's a lot that you get back. I think that's why people are kind of saying, like, well, why do you do it? And what I found was that at this later stage of my career, I realized, wow, I go and teach and like, you feel like a rock star. And it's like, students are just going, Professor Rodriguez, da, 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 and what about this? And what about that? And if you've just been in industry for a couple, at least a couple decades, you have so many stories to share that students want to hear. Well, what about this situation? What about that? And all you have to do is like, oh yeah, I remember when I had this disaster. I mean, students love to hear disasters and successes and how you navigated certain things. And you don't get that in industry, right? Because everybody we talk to is like, oh yeah, I've done that before, this or that. Oh yeah, I'll talk to Michelle Lott and we'll say, oh yeah, have you had a client like this? Oh yeah. But students, it's all new for them. And it's a great way to give back and then feel like, oh, you really have a lot of purpose to be able to share.
I know I did ask you to restart, but I have to take a quick celebration. Bambot, I haven't seen you in so long.
Joe, hi everybody.
What's going on?
We've been busy, down in the weeds.
Tell us just give me a 30-second update on your breast diagnostic tool.
Yeah, so to everybody, I'm the CEO of Fisher Imaging. We're a medical device company focused on improving detection for breast cancer. We've been working on a technology that essentially doubles the resolution and contrast of today's breast imaging that is done using obviously mammography. And we do it using a lower radiation dose. And our kind of claim to fame is we do it in a way that does not require the painful breast compression that is used in today's mammography, and which is for women on this panel. It is the number one reason for women avoiding mammography in the first place. And so we've been working on that. We actually we're an NIH grant funded company. We've gotten a little bit of angel investment, and we're hopefully getting our device built by the end of the year. I was interested in this panel because we actually have a partnership, a research partnership with Johns Hopkins University and with Emory University, Emory in Atlanta, Georgia. And so we've been working with academics, with professors, and with research groups there, and with radiologists. So that in a nutshell is what we're doing.
Well, it's good to see you again.
Thank you, Joe.
That's good. Okay. Nice to hear. So, anyways, obviously guest lectures, as everyone had mentioned, but also if you're not really that comfortable with guest lecturing, some of you have mentioned you can go in and review capstone pitches and presentations, senior design projects. Those are usually types of things where you can go and be on a judging panel and give feedback. And then also, even if it's not a final presentation, a lot of times just helping students, capstone teams, senior projects teams. So this is, masters, but also undergrad senior design projects often need help, not only in the engineering side, but in the other, business schools, things like that. A lot of these project teams can use industry feedback. There are also, you can participate in a panel. That's pretty typically easy. Job fairs, alumni gatherings, if your university or college is in your area, or if they're doing things remotely. And then also not to forget some of these student organizations that you can participate in, whether it be SWE, as Society of Women Engineers, but also National Society of Black Engineers, SHPE, and then the list goes on in terms of great ways that you can engage in various public events that are connected through a university or academia in some sort. Of course, sponsoring capstone projects is another way, or advising those projects. So that requires more time than just once a year. But basically, the one thing that UCSF and UC Berkeley does, similar to other programs like the Translational Medicine program, is we get our projects from sponsors, and those sponsors are either small startup companies, larger companies, but also UCSF physicians, Stanford, Davis physicians, and also faculty members that might be in the bioengineering space or other, closely related departments that would be working on a bioengineering device or medicine. So you cannot, if you sponsor a project, you can engage with students. You'll typically have to be required or at least asked to engage with students 1 or 2 hours a week over the course of about 9 months or a year, depending on what the program capstone project length of time is. And if you are an advisor, perhaps you're not the sponsor of the project, but maybe you're an advisor. What's helpful is if you have, say, a lot of times we'll have a physician from UCSF that is a capstone sponsor, but they really don't have any business experience. So then we'll usually bring in an additional sponsor as an advisor, say, into the project with the students to help them understand what might be needed for the business side of things, or maybe it's other things. Could be intellectual property, could be regulatory. Because as the students are working on these projects, they're also in the process of learning, and sometimes they need a little bit more than just the sponsor who might be a physician or a startup.
And excuse me, when I worked with San Jose State, they just called them senior projects for the students too. And I used to get a lot of good packaging work that way.
Yeah.
They were quite innovative. So I just want to tell people there's different names in different ways. So
yes, good. Thank you, Jan. Absolutely right. So well, I'll get into this in a little bit slide about how to kind of find these things out. But I'm going to give you just one example that was from several years ago, but it can show you how projects can move along. So this particular project was called a Triton application, or an app. It was from Gauss Surgical. This was about 10 years ago, and the sponsor was this Dr. David Rempel. He's now an emeritus professor at UCSF. And so he came forth with a problem that was monitoring blood loss during surgery. And his solution was an app to basically just modifying existing technology to help quantify loss of blood. So what's nice about this is that in the project, during the capstone project, the team of students created and tested some initial prototypes. This particular capstone project then went on to operate as a startup company, as Gauss Surgical. They were able to receive at least more than one 510K clearance, and they were acquired by Stryker fairly recently in 2021. So that doesn't have, obviously everyone knows that in the whole space of startups, most of these fail or they go by the wayside. But when you start with something and you're just getting some initial seed funding, or maybe friends and family money, a lot of times to move things along, it's really a nice way to get things started by having a team of students work on a project. So our program is between Berkeley and UCSF, so they're across the bay from each other. It's a joint program. Typically, a lot of times these programs are in a campus environment to where you have a medical school as well as strong engineering and business. And so our program was started with the ideation actually coming from Andy Grove of Intel. As it turned out, Andy Grove, when he was going through some cancer treatment, it's not what he died of, but at UCSF, he became very good friends with Dr. Mark Schumann, who's still at UCSF, an emeritus professor and doctor in oncology. And so Andy Grove started our program because he said, why does it take so long to get these technologies that you're telling me about, Dr. Schumann, into clinical use? And so they had a conversation. The program basically started with the first class that was called the anti-medical school class that Dr. Schumann taught at UCSF, because he was really frustrated with how medical school teaching was going, which still is a lot today, which is all about here's a disease, here are these findings, this is the way you treat it, but there's no innovative thinking in terms of how to make things better, how to do better treatments or think innovatively and collaborate with engineers and scientists to improve things. So he teaches a class called the Anti-Medical School, and then Andy Grove then funded our program with an initial, I think, $1 million or $2 to get things started. And his requirement was that it be across both campuses of Berkeley and UCSF so that we could then teach fully, as you'll see here, not only the science side of things at the UCSF side, but also engineering and business classes. So we have the technical courses that you'll see at the top. We have core classes that are basically kind of goes across kind of like the biodesign type of model, but also business from the Haas School on the Berkeley campus, clinical needs at UCSF. And so that's pretty much how our project and our teaching works. In our specific area, we've got the IP that remains with the company or the sponsor. Students put in basically 10 to 20 hours a week, and then the sponsor is requested to put in 1 to 2 hours a week. And you'll see that's probably pretty similar with other projects. So for us, ours is a 10-month program, and it goes from early August all the way through June. And specifically, we go across a quarter system at UCSF, a semester system at Berkeley. So instead of being a normal 9 months, ours goes 10 months because we start early at the UCB timeline, UC Berkeley, and then we end in the early June. And so you can see students, we start vetting our projects early. So I'm getting basically all my capstone projects have been submitted pretty much. I'll be going through them in July. Students have a say in terms of what they get to work on. So they get to vote on their favorite projects. And the sponsors will pitch the projects to the students in a 20-minute presentation in this August time period. And then the vetting happens by students voting. I work with Dr. Shubho Roy, and we then match up students based on their voting, but also based on what the sponsors are requesting in terms of expertise from students. And then they're off and running, and then they do a final pitch at the end to a public audience. So that's what our program looks like. But as some of you had mentioned, there are so many programs across the US. John Hopkins, extremely well known. And also we also heard from Bambot, of course, the Georgia Tech program with Emory University, also well known. Stanford Biodesign. We heard about Washington Department, University of Washington has a great bioengineering program there. I'm a little bit biased because my daughter went there and got her PhD. But Michigan, Minnesota, North Carolina has a great program at Chapel Hill that is in combination with North Carolina State University, University of Florida, and then Santa Clara, where I also taught. But the list goes on. But I just wanted people to be aware of, it's not like there's only a couple of these. This is just the beginning. And yeah, academia needs you, because basically if we put industry with academia, then we get innovation in health, and we also get student success.
I put in the chat at the beginning of today's call an article that whenever I hear academia in the context of medical devices, I refer back to a 10X alumna, Melissa Naiman, who worked at University of Illinois Chicago's School of Public Health for 12 years. And the name of the article is "Why Are Productive University Partnerships So Hard?" And I gave you all the link, but I'll read just the subheads. The purpose of university research is to generate knowledge, not value. Second, tenure is to professors what exits are to startups. Which I think is interesting now that I know a tenured professor. Faculty members are not CEOs. Be prepared for sticker shock. It's not free. And the last she writes is, lost time is never found again. That university researchers often struggle with efficiency and time management. Are all of these fair in your assessment, Verna?
Yes, I think that's spot on. I actually have a pretty good slide that kind of shows that. Let me forward here. So yeah, so this slide here, I think is helpful because it shows, move this out of the way for myself. Yeah, so basically, this yellow bar that you see, so you see this professor, kind of cartoonish character who's got a concept, he's got some kind of an idea. And in his or her mind, it's all about, okay, I've got to just write grant and negotiate contracts. And then I get a contract and then like, okay, I'm done. I get to start sleeping 5 hours, 5 hours a night again. But basically, you know, you've got all this blue and green boxes that have to happen if you want to get anything commercialized. And I think a lot of faculty don't really care about if this gets commercialized or not. There might be other people that do, and maybe it seems like a great idea. They might be interested in generating some intellectual property for the university, but that's probably about as far as it goes. You know, because there really is not an incentive on their part to basically commercialize something, right? Rob, it looks like you've got your hand up and had some experience in
Before
this.
you do, Rob, just Rick writes that said many universities demand patent ownership, and to that, Andre is going to present on July 14th about the patent office and how it's skewed against small business, I think is the essence of your talk. I was just talking with Maren yesterday. She called on our family friend, Greg Grissett, for a concept that she's working on and gave her some advice. And I just wanted to give you that perspective. Robert.
I've had quite a few companies over the years that have applied for SBIR grants, and I would say about 50% of them, maybe more than 50%, have gotten their grants, and that's been quite successful. But part of the SBIR program is they need industry collaboration. So when you have an academic that comes up with a new technology, a new concept for a device, they need somebody to help them commercialize it. And so we have a lot of companies that have asked us to write letters of support, to do the regulatory filings for them. And because we also teach design controls and help them establish quality systems, we've been able to help them a lot on SBIR, both in the phase 1 and the phase 2 grants.
Thank you for that. Goldie?
Yeah, so patent is usually what my experience is. Most university would not give patents if they are developing or partnering in design and development. And the other thing I find is that labs, university labs, they will charge, even if it's a sponsor, they will charge for every part of the university facility you use. So the cost is pretty high working with university. What's your experience, Verna?
So, sorry, I was getting a call at the same time that had, but ask your question again, so make sure I heard it right.
So I'm just saying that the patent is sure when you're working with universities, they want to be part of the patent or own the patent. The second thing I found working with small companies that using university labs or any part of the facility of university you pay a big price for that, right? So they are not, even though you sponsor many studies, but you still pay as a normal, like it's not academia price you pay.
It's very different depending on where you go. So since I worked at both Santa Clara University, which is a private institution, as well as UC Berkeley, which is public, it varies quite a bit across campuses and even from state to state. So first of all, a lot of universities, in order to basically make the arrangement workable, so you can get both industry as well as faculty involved, for our intellectual property, and this happened at Santa Clara as well as at UC Berkeley, if you are using and the students are working in the company's space, the sponsor space, then the intellectual property remains with the sponsor, with the company. If you are a startup and you don't have space, the one thing I've been putting into place is connections to these kind of labs. There's 2 of them. I've got one called Serious Engineering, and they basically, their niche is a startup space where people can do product builds for medtech. And there's also one that does pharma called Badass Labs. They're in Alameda, and they are these 2 places are plug and play. So I tell the startups that don't have their own lab yet, you can go and pay anywhere from about $1,500 to a few $1,000s, $4,000 or $5,000 a month, and work in these spaces on an hourly basis, on a monthly basis, and then you eliminate that problem. For the obviously for the universities that have faculty or UCSF positions, they have already signed away, and their intellectual property is already going to be owned by the university that they're working for. So in this way, as long as you have the work being done predominantly in the space of where the company or the sponsor is, then you're fine. And also it does vary if you are going to be paying to use space, because some of the universities have these incubator spaces. Shop around, because it's all different in terms of what the requirements are.
Thank you.
Shabir, I'm interested to hear about your experience with the two universities. I think you said Emory and Johns Hopkins.
Yes, thank you. It's good and bad. The good is, a lot of the facilities that you get, as Verna pointed out. But the bad is they don't necessarily align with your timelines. They have their own, for lack of a better word, agenda. Their focus is publications. Their focus is, to advance research, go to new frontiers, new ideas, things like that, which may not necessarily align with what you want to do. You want to build a product and get it out. And so there is an inherent conflict there that you have to manage.
Yeah.
And you just have to be on top of that. And sometimes, it's like fishing, you have to let the fish go sometimes a little bit. So because the relationship is also very important. But I was actually intrigued, Verna, by a comment you made about this professor who taught this anti-medical school course. And asking the question, why does it take so long? So the thing about medical devices in particular is this idea of, the Silicon Valley attitude of fast, frequent failure. And, it's okay if you fail. I mean, that's good if you're building an app for, calling a car. But for a medical device, it's just not, you cannot have that kind of failure. You have to be, there's a lot of regulation. You're touching patients. You have to do the diligence that is necessary to protect patients and patients' health and not to harm anybody. And a good example of that is what happened with the submersible just this week.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. So kind of going back to projects and working, on these capstones with university. What's key, and what I tell people that are thinking about sponsoring, as I said, make sure that you pick a project that is not on some kind of fast track. You want to be a project where it's going to provide value to you as well as the student. So Dr. Shuval Roy and I, we pick projects based on, okay, is this going to be a good learning vehicle? We don't really care if it fails or moves to market. But if it's a project that is basically going to move your company along in terms of, maybe it's a pet project, maybe it is a next generation that you want to kind of vet out to see if it's a new feature or a different market space. Those are all great projects. So kind of figure out what is going to be a good vehicle for learning. But for your own company, think about, okay, where might I just get some value because I find a different regulatory strategy, or I have engineers do some feature improvement in testing. Maybe they do some usability on something. So things, but make sure you pick a project that is not on your fast track or on your timeline, something that's going to be just an added benefit on a sideline project or something that you wouldn't otherwise be getting done.
Yeah, something that might be a future product.
Yes, exactly. That's pretty much all the projects that we get. Or like I said, if it's from physicians or faculty, it's like, you want to be at the stage, whether it's a drug or a device, where you've at least gotten to like the probably the feasibility stage. Even if you're at the concept stage on a lot of devices, if the technology is already existing, such that like maybe it's a you already know it's going to be probably a guide wire and some catheter type of a thing. Well, then I would say, oh, that's already at a feasibility because you don't have new technology there. Correct. Those are all great capstone projects that are quite doable and probably have a good way of success. And also, Bam, but like you said, what's important is to realize that in terms of failure, it's different if you are thinking about things in terms of operations and manufacturing, because failure is not an option. But in R&D, you need to go for fast failure before you get into any kind of clinical environment, way before. And the way that I found is that with these labs, like the one Badass Labs, but also Serious Engineering, when you can do take away a lot of the effort that the scientists are taking with, say, document control, ordering, reviewing contracts. If you can take a lot of the time that engineers or scientists want to be doing testing and offload that into these kind of incubator type of companies that will let you come and build, then you're able to move things a lot faster because you can do quick tests appropriately, fail fast, realize, oh, that doesn't work. Okay, we're going to try this other machine or this other testing equipment or this other prototype. You want to be able to do those quickly and basically, buy down the risk so that you can move faster and get to a better iteration or prototype.
Ross, I see you're writing a note of thanks and you need to jump off before you do. Ross and Shabir and Eddie and Elizabeth in particular, I hope you can join us next week. Scott was employee number 7 at Massimo for business development and sales. And as a result, he's rich. He has all this spare time and such. And as you look to roll out, you might have an idea or two, or potentially could be a helpful consultant for you in the future.
Thanks for the reminder. I'm planning to be there.
You bet. Goldie, and then we'll wrap for today.
Yeah, quick comment on this discussion. I worked for Profound, and it was a startup with very challenging technology. So for us, scientific
Remind us, what was the technology? What were you working on?
It's the combination of sending RF energy, ultrasound energy inside the MR bore and ablating something in the body, right? So MR requires quiet signals, and you are sending signals that are not quiet. So it was a scientific uncertainties all over. So to answer Shabir's point is that you do want to move fast, but as a medical device, you have to make that division. Either it is a scientific uncertainty that you don't need to document everything. You modify and you test, and you modify, you test until you see that it is worth documenting a version that can now go forward. So there is a balance for small startup. Like documentation can be burdensome. But no documentation in medical device can also be very risky. So it's a balance you strike.
Very risky is understating it.
Thank you.
You can kill somebody.
Verna, thank you for today. I knew it would be a nice change for everyone to talk about this angle. As for promise, Scott will be our guest next week. We have Andre in 3 weeks. The 7th is open at the moment. And thank you all. It's a beautiful day out in Western Washington. I hope it is where you too, as we just crossed our vernal equinox. I hope you have a nice long day of sunshine this weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.